Christina's Ghost, Chapter 16, Two of a Kind. They checked and found that the only motel in Clearwater's Main Street was filled with tourists. "We could go back to that motel we passed on the highway," Uncle Ralph said, "or we can sleep in the car. What do you think?" "The car," Chris said at once. She didn't want to leave the lights of the town. Uncle Ralph looked relieved. "The car it is," he said. "This is going to be a short night anyway." He parked just off Main Street, and after making sure Chris was comfortable and back, he settled down in the driver's seat. His shock of gray hair, silvered by the street light, was the last thing Chris saw before she slept. Good old Uncle Ralph, she thought. He understood how she felt about staying in Clearwater tonight. He felt the same way. They woke early when a little boy tapped on the windshield and grinned at them. Uncle Ralph drove to the sheriff's office. "I'll be glad to get rid of these," he said, touching the pocket that held the stamps. "I've never been in charge of a fortune before." Chris waited in the car and almost fell asleep again before he returned, looking pleased with himself. "The sheriff was pretty surprised," he told Chris as they headed back to the coffee shop for breakfast. "It isn't every day that evidence turns up to explain a 30-year-old crime." "Did you tell him about the ghosts?" "No, that's a silly question," Uncle Ralph said. "I told him we found them some valuable stamps in a comic book. Accidentally. I did not tell him about Russell Charles or about Thomas Dixon. Or about cold winds blowing through the house or footsteps going thunk in the night. I have my reputation to think of, you know." "But it did happen," Chris said, a little doubtfully. In the bright light of the morning, with good smells of breakfast toast and bacon around them, last night's adventure was beginning to seem a little unreal. "It did happen," Uncle Ralph reassured her. "You know it, and I know it, but there's no reason that anyone else would hear about it. Agreed?" "Well, except Mom and Dad," Chris said. "If you must." They left it at that. An hour later, they were on their way back to the house, and Chris was struggling to ignore a whole flock of butterflies in her stomach. No, not butterflies. She thought eagles. "We have to go back at least once," Sport Uncle Ralph had insisted. "Or at least I do. My notes are there in my typewriter. To say nothing of our clothes. You can wait in town if you'd rather." "Oh, no. It wouldn't be fair to make him go back to the house alone." "Good girl," Uncle Ralph said. "If there's anything strange going on, we'll just grab our stuff and get out permanently." "Right," Chris agreed. Now she held her breath as the car made its final turn into the yard behind the house. A blue sedan was parked near the back steps. As Chris and Uncle Ralph stared at it in astonishment, Aunt Grace climbed out on one side and Jenny on the other. "Oh, good grief," Uncle Ralph groaned. "Not now." But Aunt Grace was waving a greeting, and Jenny came flying across the grass to meet them. Her blonde hair was shining in the sun. "Where were you?" she shouted. "Grandma's coming home today, Chrissy. We're going to get her." "Hi, Jenny." Chris gave her little sister a hug, but her eyes were on the house. All the windows were open. The curtains hung straight and still. "Where in the world have you two been?" Aunt Grace demanded, "going off leaving this place open to anyone who wandered by. Really, Ralph?" "We had to go to town," Uncle Ralph said. "And no one wanders by here except you, Grace." He scowled. "You didn't go in, did you?" "Of course I didn't go in," Aunt Grace snapped. "I don't walk uninvited into other people's houses. I wasn't even sure this was the right place. But the car was gone, and I thought surely if it was the right place, you'd be back soon. I mean, with all the windows open and the door open and all." Her voice trailed off as Uncle Ralph marched past her up the stairs and disappeared into the house. For just one moment, Chris hesitated. She felt so safe out here with Aunt Grace and Jenny. Birds sang in the woods, and the air buzzed with insects. Then she ran up the steps after Uncle Ralph. "Well, honestly," Aunt Grace said, and followed with Jenny. The kitchen was warm and full of light. The worn brick floor gave back a ruddy glow, and the white painted cabinets shone in the sun. "Why, this is really quite nice," Aunt Grace said, sounding surprised. "These old houses can be so damp and musty." That was what was different, Chris thought. The musty smell was gone, and the gloom was gone with it. They followed Uncle Ralph as he led his way down the hall, into the parlor, through the dining room and study, and back into the front hall. Aunt Grace and Jenny thought they were being given a tour, but Chris knew Uncle Ralph wanted to look around. Except for the books piled on the floor in the study, there was no trace of the terrifying events of the night before. The rooms were bright and still. Christina, you take Jenny upstairs and show her your bedroom, Aunt Grace ordered. I want to talk to Ralph for a while. We have to make plans now for your grandmother's coming home. Chris looked at Uncle Ralph wide-eyed. Upstairs? You don't have to, Uncle Ralph said quickly. We can all go up and look around later. Chris gulped. That's okay, she said. I think everything's all right now. So do I, Uncle Ralph replied, or I wouldn't let you go. Aunt Grace frowned. What in the world? Come on, Grace, Uncle Ralph said. I'll make coffee. Tell me about Ma. Jenny crowded close to Chris as they climbed the stairs. It's awful at Aunt Grace's, she whispered. I have to eat liver and peas, and she boils the chicken, and I can't watch any good television shows. She poked Chris in the ribs. I bet it was awful staying with Uncle Ralph, too. They had reached the top of the stairs. All the doors, except for that of Chris's bedroom, were closed. The chest was against the wall at the end of the corridor, and the air was fresh and sweet, with the lake breeze blowing through Chris's bedroom window. It wasn't so bad here, said Chris. Jenny peeked briefly into Chris's room and then turned to the door next to it. What's in there? She demanded, and threw the door open. Hey, it's a little kid's room. Oh, I wish I'd stayed here instead of with Aunt Grace. This would have been my room for sure. She darted around, admiring the posters and running her fingers over the game boxes and on the shelves. Chris stood in the doorway. The room had changed. Even the bed is my size, Jenny squealed. Look. Chris looked. The bed covers had been turned back, and waiting for 30 years, were pulled up, and they were neatly smoothed. She crossed the red carpet and stood beside Jenny. Goodbye, Russell, she thought. She touched the pillow, knowing as surely as he'd told her that she wouldn't see the little boy again. He could rest in peacefully now that the stamps were found, and the last mystery surrounding his death was solved. Come on, Jenny shouted. I want to see the rest of the rooms. She ran away and down the hall, throwing open bedroom doors left and right. If I stayed here, I'd have slept in a different room every night, she announced. You picked the worst room, silly old Chrissy. What's in here? Her hand was on the attic door. Nothing, Chris cried. Don't open it. Jenny paid no attention. She had the door open and was partway up the stairs when Chris reached her. Big deal, she said, shaking off Chris's hand. This is nothing but a stuffy old attic. Boring. The staircase was warm and dusty. Chris forced herself to look up where the dust floated in the bright beams of sunlight. Boring, she agreed. She leaned against the wall until she stopped shaking. When they went downstairs, Uncle Ralph and Aunt Grace were in the kitchen drinking coffee with a box of ginger snaps between them. Uncle Ralph looked at Chris and raised his eyebrows. She shook her head, and he leaned back with a satisfied nod. Ralph tells me you're welcome to stay on here if you wish, Christina. Aunt Grace watched her suspiciously. I plan to run out to the farm every day for a while to see how your grandmother's doing, so I suppose you don't have to come back with us today. It's up to you. Chris thought about it. It would be liked at the farm. She could talk for hours with Grandma and play games with Jenny. She could go exploring with Maggie, the sheepdog, and fish in the stream. The long, lonely days would be ended. Uncle Ralph smiled at her. And besides all that, he said, reading her mind once again, you wouldn't have to eat canned hash and canned chili every day. Chris felt her face turn red. I don't care about that, she said fiercely. I like being with you, Uncle Ralph. They stared at each other. Chris smiled. The words had astonished them both. But I guess I'll go to Grandma's, she said. There's stuff I can do there. Uncle Ralph nodded. I don't blame you a bit, he said. I'll miss you, but I have my work and I want to stick to it. You and I are two of a kind, sport, independent as they come. Jenny leaned across the table, eager to be part of the conversation. Chris is a tomboy, she protested. She always gets into trouble. You don't like tomboys. Times change, Uncle Ralph said. He helped himself to another ginger snap. So do uncles. He winked at Chris, who winked back.